Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, we would like to thank you for joining us on this event this afternoon and welcome you all to this webinar that we are starting right now under the title Sowing Innovation, Reaping Sustainability, an event that we have organized between two countries, Portugal and Spain, between the CIB, Centro de Información de Biotecnología in Portugal, and also Antama Foundation in Spain, and with the aim of discussing the contribution of the cultivation of GM seeds when we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of continuous cultivation of BT maize in the European Union, in Spain, and in Portugal. Both countries, we share many things at agricultural level, similar weather, soils, crops, and we also share, of course, problems, challenges, and opportunities. And when these seeds have been cultivated in our countries for 25 years and with more than 1 million hectares during this period, it is time for analyzing what this has meant for our agriculture, for our rural environment, and also for our food chain. And now I would like to welcome my Portuguese colleague, Jorge Canoto. Jorge, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Soledad. Just a few words before we start. First, I would like to highlight this collaboration between the Antama Foundation from Spain and the Center for Information in Biotechnology in Portugal. I believe this kind of collaboration between different institutions in Europe is crucial to spread knowledge about the agricultural biotechnologies and the positive impact they have for an environmental and socioeconomic sustainable agriculture. Allow me a special mention to Conchi Novillo and Alfredo Lopes and Carla Amaro for their involvement in the organization of this webinar. Many thanks also to all participants that have accepted to participate in this webinar. And finally, a word of thanks to CropLife Europe, which has supported several of our initiatives and in particular this one. So we have a tight schedule, so I think it's best to start right now with our invited speakers. Thanks all.
Thank you very much, Jorge. So we are now at a key moment for our food system in the EU. Under the umbrella of the Green Deal, we have the Biodiversity 2030 and also the Farm to Fork strategy. And we are looking also for an increasingly sustainable agriculture. And also we have a new CAP that we have just started to apply 2 months ago. So this is, Jorge, our new scenario. And on the 25th anniversary of the commitment of Portuguese and Spanish farmers to this technology, and with the great challenge that we as agri-sector are facing, feeding a growing world population, today what we want to do is to analyze with different experts where are we right now and how we should look to the future. So the webinar that we are celebrating this afternoon will consist on 3 different parts. In the first one, we will have the participation of 2 researchers, Dr. Graham Brooks and Dr. Francisco Aregal, who will share with us the main conclusions and results of their studies in which they have analyzed the contributions of GM seeds in the world and also within the European Union. Then we will have 2 colloquiums. In the first one, Graham and Francisco will be joined by Judith Martín de la Fuente from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food in Spain, and Paula Garcia from the General Directorate of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine in Portugal. And with them, we would like to discuss the role of our regulatory framework. And then a second colloquium in which we want to know the point of view of the consumers. So we are thinking about seeds, grains, or food. So that means that we will be talking with farmers, with the feed industry, and also with final consumers. We will be joined then by Gabriela Cruz, Portuguese farmer, José Luis Romeo, Spanish farmer, and also the president of the Spanish Maize Producer Association, Jaime Pizarra, Secretary of IACA, Portuguese Feed Industry Association, and Bill Wirth, Senior Policy Analyst at the Consumer Choice Center. And before beginning, if you like, we would like to share with you a few words that Ms. Clara Aguilera, MEP from Spain, and Mr. Álvaro Amaro, Portuguese MEP, have sent us for this webinar. So we listen first to Clara Aguilera.
I wanted to say hello to the Antama Foundation. I would like to acknowledge the important work you are doing in the field of science and innovation in agriculture. And also, I would like to highlight your work as it helps a lot the agricultural sectors in our country, and therefore, you are also an example for Europe. Without science and innovation, there would be no future for agriculture, which is why I think it is good that we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of the BT maize, that GM maize, which some see as perverse, but which has been so useful for some areas of Spain. I will never be against scientific advances. For me, environmental sustainability is very important, and I believe that innovation will bring us much closer to achieving it in the future. So, congratulations on your 25th anniversary, and congratulations on the work done by the Antama Foundation.
Thanks a lot, Clara, as always, for your attention, for your words, and for the commitment to innovation and technology in agriculture. And now we can listen to Mr. Álvaro Amaro.
Thank you for the invitation from CIB, Centro de Informação de Biotecnologia, to participate in this webinar to celebrate the 25 years of BT maize in Portugal and Spain. When we discussed genetically modified organisms and new genomic techniques in the European Parliament, I am particularly proud to say that in the European Union we already have some area with GMOs. I am proud that it is a success story. More than 100,000 hectares are cultivated with this approved BT maize variety that represent a gain for producers who are able to have bigger yields with less intervention, and a gain for the environment with a large reduction in the use of insecticides. European agriculture will have a major challenge for the coming years: the need to increase food production within the European Union without increasing pressure on the environment. I believe that new genomic techniques are one of the main tools to increase input efficiency and thus increase production within the European Union. This is what I have been advocating several times here in the European Parliament and in my political group, the European People's Party. We are in favor of good regulation and use of these new technologies. On the other hand, new genomic techniques are also a major tool to address the major challenge that cuts across all sectors of climate change mitigation. With these new technologies, it will be possible to develop varieties of cultivated species with greater resilience, for example, to soil dryness, that will further affect countries in Southern Europe. The European Union, which is at the forefront of so many innovative technologies and practices, cannot and should not be left behind when it comes to new genomic techniques. Innovation and technology should be the pillar of the successful development of European agriculture. Thank you, and I wish you a good discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amaro, for also joining us on this anniversary of the maize cultivation in Portugal and Spain, and thank you for your words. And now we are starting the first part of this webinar with Graham Brooks from BG Economics in UK and Francisco Areal from Northumbria University, also in UK. Both researchers are going to present us the conclusions and the results of their latest reports. So with Graham Brooks, we are going to take a first picture of the global scenario in which we find ourselves. Under the title Crop Biotechnology, Global Economic and Environmental Impacts from 1996 to 2020, we give the floor to Graham Brooks for his presentation. Graham, thanks again for joining us, and you can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Are everyone seeing my slides? Right, okay, I'm ready to go. Thank you, Sol, and thank you very much to both Antama and Sipa for inviting me to talk to you today. I'm going to give you the global perspective on the use and impact of crop biotechnology over the last 25 years. Next slide, please. First of all, I'd like to give you some background information. I've been looking at the global impact of the technology since about 2004, and the latest information that I'm going to present to you was published in the middle of last year and is in fact the 15th annual review. As a result of all this ongoing work, I am now the author or joint author of more than 35 papers in peer-reviewed journals on the impact of the technology. And the detail of the information I'm going to talk about is available in 3 papers in the journal GM Food and Crops that you can see the links on this slide. Incidentally, I was also the first researcher to ever look at the impact of using BT maize in Spain in 2002, 21 years ago, and I did update analysis on this in 2019 on the first 21 years, and again there's a link to that paper on this slide, but I am not going to talk about the results of that work. I'm leaving the specifics of impact in Spain and Portugal to Francesco, who will follow me, but I can say that I know that his conclusions and findings are very similar to mine. Next slide. The analysis I'm going to present to you covers the period to 2020. It looks at the socio-economic impacts at the farm level, and the environmental impacts from 2 perspectives. One associated with pesticide use change and the associated environmental impact, and the other associated with greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. How did we do it? Well, as 25 years of operation now, there is a considerable amount of peer review literature on the impact. But bearing in mind that any impact literature doesn't tend to cover every trait in every country for every year, it's also been supplemented by some of my own analysis. To try and make it as dynamic as possible, the analysis tries to use updated costs, prices and yield information from each year, and we review pest and weed control practices in respective countries on conventional versus biotech crops. In relation to pesticide impact, just looking at the amount of active ingredient used and how it changes a fairly crude indicator. So we also use the environmental impact quotient indicator developed at Cornell in the 90s, which is a better indicator of environmental impact than just looking at the amount of active ingredient, but it is still nevertheless a pretty crude indicator itself. And lastly, we look at the carbon impacts. Next slide, please. I tried to present the findings that you're going to see from 3 perspectives, and try to look at it from a sustainability point of view. The contribution to global food security and reducing pressure to use new land in agriculture. Secondly, the contribution to reducing agriculture's environmental footprint, and lastly, the contribution to economic sustainability, which is just as important as environmental sustainability. Next slide, please. If we start by looking at the impact of the technology globally on yields, well, this slide gives you the perspective from the insect-resistant technology that has been used in the crops of maize, cotton and soybeans over this period. The soybeans only in South America since 2013. And you can see that where this technology has been used across all the different countries and the areas where the technology has been used, the average yield improvement from farmers using insect-resistant maize has been an increase of 17.7% yield improvement, 14.5% yield improvement from insect-resistant cotton, and 9.3% improvement from the insect-resistant trait in soybeans. Next slide, please. You also see yield and production impacts associated with the use of herbicide-tolerant technology. This has mainly come from improved weed control in some countries, such as Romania, when the technology was allowed to be used there before it joined the European Union. In North America, the second generation of the technology, in the US and Canada, and in South America, primarily where the technology, by shortening the total time of a season of growing soybeans, has allowed a second crop of soybeans to often be planted after wheat, which has significantly boosted production in Argentina and Paraguay. Next slide, please. If you bundled up and aggregated all those yield and production increases to the crop level and aggregated them to the country level, this slide shows you that as a result of using the technology globally, the world has produced 330 million more tons of soybeans and nearly 600 million tons more maize or corn, 37 million tons more cotton lint, and nearly 16 million tons more canola or oilseed rape. If you then looked at it from the perspective of saying, if the world had wanted to produce that extra production using non-GM conventional technology, the next slide gives you the perspective of how much extra land would have been required for conventional production to have accounted for that amount of production. I give you the 2020 figures there, and what that basically said is that the extra production that came from biotechnology crops in 2020, if produced on conventional agriculture, would have required the world to plant 23.4 million more hectares of those crops to achieve that extra production. To give you context, that is approximately equal to the combined agricultural area of the Philippines and Vietnam. Next slide, please. If we then move on to greenhouse gas emissions and how the technology has contributed to reducing those. This comes from two main sources. Firstly, reduced fuel use, where insecticides or herbicides have been applied using mechanical means. You've had fuel savings, and you've also had fuel savings with less ploughing, where the technology has facilitated farmers going into no-tillage production systems. But the main way that it has reduced greenhouse gases is by facilitating farmers going into, and more importantly, staying in reduced and no-till production systems, which means there's less ploughing and additional soil from decaying plant matter being stored in soils. Next slide, please. If you look at the fuel savings over this 25-year period, the technology we estimate has resulted in carbon dioxide emission reduction of 39.1 billion kilograms less CO2 released into the atmosphere from using 14.6 million less litres of fuel. The context of that in terms of cars off the road equivalent is 25.9 million cars. Next slide, please. If you then look at the more significant soil carbon storage savings, the 2020 equivalent figures show that this has been the equivalent to taking about 14 million cars off the road for 1 year. If you then aggregated all the annual savings over the 25-year period, it comes to about 344 billion kilograms of CO2 not released into the atmosphere. That would represent an absolute maximum, which we know has not really been the total amount saving. And this is because some land has not stayed in permanent or reduced tillage, and the truer savings will be lower. Trying to get a handle on this, work by people in the USDA estimate that about 20% of the arable land in the period 2012-16 stayed in no-till, but the figures in South America are likely to be much higher, possibly up to about 80%. So using those two extremes of a range, we estimate that the likely cumulative CO2 saving is equivalent to between 46 million and 183 million cars off the road for 1 year equivalent. Next slide, please. If you then bundle the two together, the combined savings for fuel and soil carbon savings, we're talking about the technology having resulted in between 108 and 314 billion kilograms of CO2 not released into the atmosphere, or between 72 million and 209 million cars taken off the road for 1 year. If we then move on to environmental footprint savings associated with pesticide use, next slide please. This slide sums up our estimates of those savings. Since 1996, the use of pesticides on the biotech crop area is approximately 750 million kilograms of active ingredient savings. That's a 7.2% reduction, which, to give you context, is roughly equal to about 1.5 times the annual pesticide active ingredient used in China. A fairly substantial amount. If you looked at the EIQ indicator as a measure of the associated environmental impact, it is in fact a more significant saving or benefit, equal to a 17.3% reduction. The largest gains have been associated with the use of insect-resistant cotton, where we've seen a 30% reduction in total insecticide use on that crop, where the technology has been employed, and a slightly higher reduction in the associated environmental impact. And I've just given you some context of the proportion of that comes from China. Next slide, please. If we then moved on to the economics side and the economic sustainability, and the return on investment that farmers have got. And what this slide shows you is essentially the return on the investment to a farmer for every extra dollar that they've spent on the biotech seed, how much extra income they've got per extra dollar spent on seed. So the overall return is a $3.76 return on investment, an average of a $3 return on for farmers in developed countries, and a very high return of over $5 per hectare in developing countries. So this slide, if there's any one in my presentation which shows you why this technology is very popular with the farmers who've tried it and why they consistently stay in it, is because of these excellent returns that they on average get. If you looked at the equivalent figures for the use of BT maize in Spain and Portugal, the returns are roughly between $4 and $5 in extra farm income per extra dollar they have spent on paying for that seed. Next slide, please. In terms of the total aggregate benefits, in 2020 it was $18.8 billion, equal to roughly 6% of the value of the global production of the 4 main crops that the technology has been used in. The cumulative benefit, $261 billion, and the average gain per hectare across all biotech crop area over that period has been $112 per hectare, and the income share more than 50% to farmers in developing countries. Next slide, please, which should give you the average returns in the countries where the technology has been used. And the key take-home message to this is that the returns tend to be highest in developing countries. Next slide, please. This slide then gives you the overall summary of the figures that I've presented to you. I'm not going to repeat them to not overrun on my time, but copies of my presentation can be made available to people for those who want them at the end of the session. Next slide, please. I presented the findings which are largely positive, and I always get asked, well, are there any negatives? Not many. The main one has been over-reliance on the use of glyphosate by some farmers in northern South America with the use of herbicide-tolerant crops, which has contributed to weed-resistant problems and resulted in farmers having to adapt and change their weed control practices, which has led to them increasing herbicide use and increasing the costs of weed control. And you've had some limited reversion to plough-based systems. And so, in other words, in 2020, the amount of herbicide used on herbicide-tolerant crops in North and South America is more than it was 15 years ago. But this has to be taken in the context of similar weed-resistant problems and increased herbicide use being a trend in conventional crop usage. And if you track the environmental profile and herbicide used on herbicide-tolerant and conventional crops over the last 20 years, you will see that herbicide-tolerant GM crops continue to offer they are relatively more profitable and less impact on the environment than on their conventional alternative in 2020 as they were 20 years ago. There's also been limited development of pest resistance to the first generation of insect resistant traits, which has reduced the effectiveness of this technology, and we've had some limited reversion to use of insecticides in some cases. However, pest-resistant problems have been largely addressed through the successful use of refuges and through the use of second and third generation newer traits with more modes of action for controlling pests. Next slide, please. My last slide. The analysis that I presented to you is drawn from a broader range of other impacts, and it is consistent evidence. And this is now showing that there is a consistent body of evidence in peer review literature on the impact of the technology. The technology has clearly made a positive net contribution to feeding the world in a more sustainable way. For those of you who want to read more information and more detail about the analysis I presented to you, there are the links again to the papers I refer to. They are all available on open access at no charge. I also provide the link to the Spain and Portugal specific study from 2019, and I would encourage you to read these papers and the references cited in them and draw your own conclusions. Thank you for your attention. I'll now hand over to Francesco, who will give you more information about the impacts in Spain and Portugal.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was saying, Francisca Graham, thank you very, very much for the picture that we have of the technology and innovation and agriculture in the world. And now with Francisco, as you said, we are going to take a new picture, but within the European Union. He will provide us an overview of the sustainability benefits associated with BT maize in Spain in the period 1998-2021, and how adoption of BT maize has contributed and can continue to contribute to achieving the aims within the EU's Green Deal. So, Francisco, thanks again for joining us, and I give you the floor.
Thank you, Sole. It is a pleasure to contribute to this webinar. And as you said, I will be presenting the results from a report commissioned by Antama on the sustainability of BT maize in Spain since its commercialization in 1998 to 2021. This work has been done by myself and the Professor Laura Riesgo at the University Pablo Lavide in Seville. I have structured this talk into three main aspects. I will provide some context to the issue of sustainability of GM crops in Europe by looking at the EU's Green Deal growth strategy and the adoption of biotech crops. What's the role of biotech crops within that strategy? I'll move on to explain how BT maize has contributed to sustainability. I will focus on not only on the benefits, the private benefits to farmers, but also social benefits through the environment, through economic benefits, through foreign trade gains, and the benefits to rural communities. And finally, I will derive some conclusions from the report. So let's start by providing a bit of information on the role or the relevance of biotech crops in achieving the EU's green growth strategy. We know that the activities we carry out as humans inevitably have an impact on nature. So, nature and economic activity are interconnected, and that leads to the need to find sustainable solutions. As economic progress and world population growth, new challenges to find these sustainable solutions arise. And as a response to those challenges, governments, international institutions design and implement strategies such as the European Union's Green Deal growth strategy. And within that strategy, we find also the European Union's Farm to Fork strategy, which actually acknowledges the role or the potential important role that biotechnology can have in increasing sustainability. In understanding the success of any innovation, we need to understand the factors, the drivers behind innovation adoption. And in this case, the adoption of the genetically modified or BT maize in Spain, the adoption by farmers in Spain. There are five main characteristics associated with rapid adoption rates. These have to do with the characteristics of the use of the innovation. So that innovation has to be perceived by the users as being relatively advantageous compared to what they currently use. The characteristics of the innovation itself, so that innovation has to be perceived as easier to understand and use than the currently adopted. Factors associated with the social, political system, legal drivers also influence or might influence the adoption of innovations. And communication channels used and the time it takes to communicate the new innovation is the fifth important characteristics that determine an increase in adoption rates of the innovation. So, how has the evolution of adoption rate of BT maize has been in Spain since its commercialization? What we have here is curves of adoption, of rates of adoption that are what we would expect. That kind of shape, of S shape, is the typical adoption rate that we would expect. So initially, not much adoption is taken by the potential adopters, and then there is a moment in which, through communication, through observation of peers, success in using the innovation, that adoption increases. And what we see in the graph also is that approximately 30% of the total surface of maize cultivated in Spain is being GM approximately since 2013. But there is variety depending on the regions. And this variety in the adoption rates might be a good indicator of the incidence of corn borer in different regions in Spain. We can see that Catalonia is close to 100% adoption of BT maize, followed by currently Navarra, which is becoming increasingly important, the adoption of BT maize there, and Aragon. Those are the three main regions where the adoption is higher and the incidence of corn borer is higher. Let's move on to talk about the contributions of BT maize cultivation to sustainability. So in here, as I said at the start, I would like to talk not only about the private benefits to farmers, but also on the social benefits. And by social benefits, I can include environmental benefits, benefits to the national economy through foreign trade, and benefits to the rural communities. Talking about those private benefits to farmers, we can talk about agronomic benefits, economic, and convenience benefits. Those are reasons why private farmers adopt BT maize in Spain, in those areas where there is a problem with corn borer. So higher maize yields are obtained in those areas compared to conventional maize. Graham has talked about the global impact and the global differences. In Spain, reports show that up to 1.34 tons per hectare difference between BT maize and conventional. Obviously, there is variation between regions, but it can be as high as that figure there. There is also a higher level of quality in BT maize compared to conventional maize. And this is because BT maize presents a reduced incidence of mycotoxins, which are known to cause health problems to animals and also to humans compared to conventional maize. There are economic benefits that are derived from these higher crop yields, and reports again in Spain put figures up to 186 euros per hectare benefits of BT maize compared to conventional maize. There is another advantage, another benefit to farmers, which is that BT maize is relatively an easy trait to cultivate. There is nothing complex about it compared to planting conventional maize. There is a reduction in the time that farmers need to take to inspect the maize cobs. There is also a reduction in the number of insecticide treatments necessary, and we will talk about more about this aspect later. Farmers can harvest quicker, and they also can collect more straw per hectare that can be used for fodder. Pesticide use, as it was highlighted by Graham before, there is an advantage of BT maize compared to conventional maize in this regard because it needs less pesticide use, which leads to less emissions and therefore a lower environmental impact. It's been estimated that between 1996 and 2010, BT maize has led to a 37% reduction in the use of insecticide against corn borer. There is also been a report, a scientific paper conducted by Professor Riesgo and myself on the environmental performance of biotech crops in general and conventional crops, and they tend to perform environmentally better, the biotech crops, compared to the conventional crops. If we talk about water footprint in terms of environmental benefits, we can highlight the blue water and the gray water. The blue water, we refer to water that comes from rain-fed water. Gray water refers to the water needed to assimilate the load of nitrogen fertilizers used in crop production based on water quality standards. And there has been a saving of approximately 93 million cubic meters of water by using BT maize compared to conventional maize in Spain during the period of the study. This is equivalent to supplying water to a population of 60,000 inhabitants per year. There is variation, again, per region of Spain, with Aragon and Catalonia being the ones that contribute most to these savings. But we have to highlight also the fact that the southern regions depend more on rain-fed water. And in that sense, that reduction of dependency on water resources is also important in those regions. Another environmental benefit can be used or can be measured by the use of land. So achieving the BT maize output obtained using conventional maize will require more land, as highlighted previously by Graham talk as well. For the case of Spain, a total of almost 9,000 hectares extra of conventional maize would have been required in order to achieve similar levels of BT maize output in the areas affected by this pest, the European corn borer, during the year 2021. And if we add up the whole period, it would be 166,000 hectares for conventional maize would be required to compensate for the additional production volumes generated by the cultivation of BT maize. We can estimate also the carbon fixation for Spain during the period 1998 to 2021, and we have done that. And the BT maize carbon fixation is 1.4 million tons of CO2, which produces an annual average of savings of 57 100,000 tons of CO2. If we look at the whole period, that 1.4 million tons basically contribute to compensate emissions of over 9,000 million kilometers traveled by vehicles, or if we want to measure it in terms of number of vehicles, this is about 34,000 vehicles. But as I said, it's not only, the social contribution is not only through environmental aspect, but also economic aspects such as the national economy. As you can see on the graph, the foreign trade of maize in Spain, we need to import more than we produce. And, by looking at the annual average price of imported maize in Spain, we can calculate what is the value of the maize imports averted by BT maize adoption in Spain for the whole period. And that accounts for nearly 340 million euros that we have saved by not importing those extra imports that would be needed in case we didn't have BT maize. There is also benefits to the rural communities. The EU Farm to Fork strategy talks about increasing resource efficiency, achieving a more competitive agriculture, reducing the pressure on the environment. Well, this is achieved by BT maize, which contributes that achievement to fix population in the rural areas and leads to more profitable farming that can sustain not only the farmers, but also the local economy or the local economies. And finally, I would like to just comment some conclusions. Basically, the first point is that BT maize and biotech technology can contribute to achieving the aims of the EU's Green Deal growth strategy, increasing growth and increasing resource efficiency, and basically finding sustainable solutions to current problems. Since the commercialization of BT maize in the EU, the adoption of BT maize by farmers in Spain has provided benefits to farmers and to society as a whole, in line with biodiversity and farm to fork strategies of the EU's Green Deal. As I highlighted, the adoption of BT maize cultivation contributed not only to the to provide agronomic benefits, but also economic, environmental, and social benefits that contributes to the sustainability of maize production in Spain. I focus in Spain in the talk because the report focuses on Spain, but from the data that we have from Portugal, similar conclusions can be obtained as well. So we can say that BT maize has contributed and will contribute to the future of EU agriculture to achieve a more sustainable agriculture in those areas where corn borer is present. So it has contributed to find solutions to current problems. And BT maize and biotechnology in general can be a complement to other sustainable production alternatives in order to achieve sustainability objectives included in the European Union's Green Deal. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco, for your presentation. Impressive data from Graham Brooks' presentation and yourselves, and the proof that innovation, technology, agriculture, and sustainability can and must work together. And after the extraordinary presentations by Graham Brooks and Francisco Areal, we move on to the first colloquium this afternoon. And joining us are Judith Martín de la Fuente from the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food in Spain, and also Paula Garcia from the General Directorate of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine in Portugal. Judith, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you, Sole, for inviting me to participate in the meeting. And congratulations to Francisco and Graham for their presentation. Well, in Spain, there are two competent authorities involved in GMOs issues. The first one is the Interministerial Council of GMOs, which is the decision-making body. And then the National Commission of Biosafety, which is responsible for the risk assessment and scientific support. Why is this very important for us? Because in Spain, policy on GMO is based on scientific criteria and scientific report adopted by this National Commission of Biosafety and also by EFSA. In addition, this policy is also based on respecting farmer freedom to choice. And what does it mean? It means that in Spain, farmers can cultivate GMO crops, conventional or organic crops. None of them can be excluded. In fact, farmers in regions affected by corn-borne disease have relied in these technologies for many, many years, with successful results, as Graham and Francisco explained previously. As regards GMO cultivation, although we apply the European Union legislative framework, specific provisions have been adopted also as regards the National Register of Activities with GMOs and also coexistence with third countries in which monitoring is forbidden. There are no mandatory requirements on coexistence, but in fact, voluntary measures on coexistence are agreed and adopted through the food chain. And there are also provisions which could contribute to coexistence, but in other national regulatory framework. For example, the National Regulation on Seed Certification and Seed Control that guarantees the availability on the market of conventional, genetically modified or organic seed. And we have also a national control program for the delivery release of GMOs in Spain. And this program includes official control in seed to verify that the presence of MON18 is registered in the labeling. And with this, it is guaranteed the freedom to choice for farmers. And also we have official control in maize farm to verify that those farmers that cultivate MON18 fulfill labeling and traceability requirements. In addition, inspectors also can check the situation of good practices such as refuges, which are very important to control the appearance of resistance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith. I would also like to welcome Paula. I don't know if she's here with us.
Yes, I'm here. And good afternoon,
Paula.
everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here joining this event that we celebrate 25 years of GM BT maize growing in EU. It's a pity that only Portugal and Spain are joining this celebration because we are the only countries in EU that still have commercial crops of GM BT maize in our countries. So it's kind of a specific from Peninsula Iberia. So it's we are alone in the rest of the EU. But regarding the regulatory framework here in Portugal, we started to grow to have a legislation, a specific legislation on coexistence. I know that in Spain it's a voluntary. They have voluntary measures for coexistence, but we decide to have here in Portugal mandatory rules for coexistence, and we have a decree law in force since 2005. So our regulatory framework includes mandatory crop registration for farmers and technical training for farmers, and also technical coexistence measures for maize, aiming to ensure the coexistence between the different ways of production, conventional, organic, and GM crops. In order to ensure the application of these measures, we have a set of obligations established in our legislation, and but the Ministry of Agriculture plays a central function in this implementation of this legislation. So it's up to the Ministry of Agriculture to perform the controls and also the monitoring program that we have in place. But of course, our regulation system is based in two major players, farmers and seed companies. In what regards technical measures, we have a flexible legislation that enables farmers to choose between several options, the ones that benefits to their own farm. So we have isolation distance, buffer zones, and also we can have pollen barriers that can also be applied as coexistence measures. Of course, in certain areas of the country where we have small farms, it's not easy to apply, for instance, both distance zones, distance as a measure, or border lines. So we have also for that specific cases the possibility that farmers can join voluntary in a production zones, and in this case farmers that are inside of these production zones, they don't need to apply any coexistence measures, because at the end of the day, even if they are conventional maize growing in that area, if all the production is going to be labeling as containing GMOs, the farmers there are not obliged to apply any specific measures of coexistence between them. So this is a case that we have that represents almost half of the area that we have now in the BT maize in Portugal is included in those production zones that the farmers voluntarily agreed upon them. So as a positive aspects that we have learned since the implementation of our legislation, and according to the control actions that we are performing, and also according to the monitoring plan, because we collect also samples from the neighboring fields, conventional neighboring fields, in order to test the adventitious presence of GMO BT maize in those fields, the results are very positive, and we didn't find any major problems regarding the implementation of the legislation, neither with problems with the neighbors, neither with the adventitious presence of BT maize in the conventional crops or organic crops. So this is a very positive result of the implementation of the legislation. Of course, for Portugal and for the Portuguese farmers, corn borer is really a problem in certain areas of the country. So that's why farmers are still want to cultivate BT maize. But of course, we have some negative aspects to also consider. And despite we have new varieties coming to the market, these new varieties that are available to the farmers, they all have the same event, Mon-A10. So Mon-A10 is a GMO from the first generations of GMOs, a very old event that with very reduced use in the rest of the world. So this means that sometimes the availability of the seeds from our market, sometimes we have problems on that, because the seed is not produced in Portugal, it's produced outside Europe, and because it's not a very important event for the third countries, the amount of seed produced annually it's not so high, so sometimes there is a shortage of seed available to the farmers. Also, another negative aspect, because we have other pests and problems that affect maize, and not only maize, but other crops, is the EU policy and strong pressure from European consumers and from the food industry that have led that the new events that are now used in the rest of the world cannot be used in EU by the Portuguese, of course, and by the EU farmers. And at the end of the day, the companies that develop those new events simply don't present their requests, their applications to authorization for growing in EU, but only for import for normally feed, for the feed sector. So at the end, the Portuguese farmers cannot benefit from this innovation, from these new varieties. And of course, when we have the Green Deal objectives and the farm to fork strategy, we don't have so much tools available to the farmers to be able to reduce it, for instance, to reduce at least 50% of pesticides till 2030. So the Green Deal and the farm to fork strategy will, in my point of view, and I believe that these GM varieties and also the new techniques, the new breeding techniques, are essential to achieve the goals and to help farmers to achieve the goals of the Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. I think you have been very, very clear. And I was going to ask now Graham a question, because at this moment, European farmers have access to the cultivation of this GM maize, this BD maize, but not to more seeds, as Paula perfectly explained to us. And yet every year we import thousands of tons of GM grain for agriculture from other countries in the world. And from your global perspective, are we making our producers less competitive?
Undoubtedly. You can see that where the technology has been used in North and South America primarily, which are leading agricultural producers and exporters of grains and oilseeds onto the world market, that they are using this technology very widely. It enhances their yields, reduces their cost of production, which is contributing to making them more competitive. And with approval for importation and use into Europe, that those grains and oilseeds can come into Europe, but European producers of the same products cannot generally benefit from the technology, with the small exception of one trait in maize that growers use in Spain and Portugal. And as Paula was saying, it's delivered great benefits to the farmers in Spain and Portugal, but it is nevertheless old technology, and the newer technologies, the second and third generations, give even better performance and wider control of other pests, most notably the pests that are rapidly developing in Africa and Asia, which it's only a matter of time before you get fall armyworm, which is the main pest, coming into Europe, and European farmers will want to control that. At the moment, their only control mechanism is to use insecticides, whereas many farmers in the rest of the world don't have to use them. But yes, fundamentally, not having access to an important technology like this, which is delivered in Europe, compromises European farm competitiveness.
And I would like also to ask Paula and Judith at a national level, because we import GM grain that is essential, as you said, for the feed industry. How important are GM seeds for the food chain in our countries? Can we say no to GM imports? Paula, maybe you can go ahead.
No, for the imports, we can say no, because we really depend of the imports of commodities for the feed sector, and so we really need to to continue the authorization of the new events as we have now, because really we depend of the soybean and canola and a lot of commodities for the feed sector. So it's really in my point of view, it's a nonsense, because we need it. We import for feed, mainly for feed, but the farmers, and I'm talking about the situation in Portugal, the farmers cannot use the technology, and we see the reduced a decreasing of the area of maize, for instance, of maize in Portugal, because a lot of constraints regarding the maize production. And at the end of the day, we import from third countries because we need it.
And Judith, I give you the floor.
Yes, I totally agree with Paula, because Europe and Spain are big importers of raw material from third countries. And those raw material, particularly soybean, are cultivated in countries in which biotechnology are very, very, very spread, with a high prevalence of BT or other GM crops. So finally, our feed is a GM feed. For example, in Spain, the 80% of the maize is used for feed production, and when we are preparing this feed for the animals, usually the maize is combined with GM soybean. So at the end, this feed will be genetically modified. And the situation is more or less the same in other European Union countries. And if we have, if we look the register of GMOs for food and feed, is really weird that there are a lot of events authorized for those purposes, but only one, as Paula said, for cultivation. And also, after the opt-out directive, this directive that was adopted in 2015, there are many countries in Europe that decided not to cultivate Money 10, but a particular provision that has this directive is that member states can allow in the future the cultivation of genetically modified crops. And that's why everybody knows that, for example, a problem now in Spain and Portugal, for example, a pest that is present now in Spain and Portugal, can be spread to other European Union countries. Particularly, there is a big challenges with the climatic change, and there are other disease that has been focused in the very beginning in a small group of countries, and then they have spread around the European Union. So we think that not only the import, but also these technologies are very important for Europe.
Thanks a lot, Judith. I have a question for Francisco now. I don't think if it's a very easy question or a very difficult one. Francisco, are innovation and sustainability incompatible? How do GM crops fit within the new EU strategies that you talked about? What will be the way?
Well, they are not, they are not incompatible. They are complementary. They go together. So where there is a problem, the solution comes from some innovation. As it has been seen, we have put some relevant evidence. For instance, for the case of the problem of corn borer, the innovation was developed. The innovation provided a solution to those who suffered the consequences of this pest. And there is no way without innovation, you will have to basically face the costs. I don't know, this happens with everything really. What we presented here is that, in those situations where there is a problem with the corn borer in Spain, farmers are willing to adopt. Obviously, where there is no problem, there is no need for this, but innovation is there to help and to contribute to the aims of the strategy of the European Union, of the green growth strategy of the European Union. I think that's something that you cannot argue about. It is a fact. Not going that route has other reasons rather than following the evidence.
Thanks a lot, Francisco. We have a question in the chat. Who can estimate the economic damage the EU will suffer by not using agricultural biotechnology? It's for any of you, if you want to answer, please.
Well,
I'll make a comment first.
Yeah, you go, Jorge.
I just say yes, you could estimate it, but it depends what assumptions you want to make. I think when I did a piece of analysis in 2008 about the benefits of BT maize in Spain and Portugal and the potential benefits of it in other countries in the European Union, that paper basically stated and estimated what the benefits being foregone just for that trait were in countries like France. And you could do the same analysis for any trait that might be applicable in the European Union. I'm not aware of anybody having done that work. It's the type of work that would have been done 20 years ago, but given the European Union has largely turned its back on using this technology, there isn't really much incentive for economists to be asked to do that analysis. But I'd be interested to know what Francisco says about it.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. Well, I think, as you said, obviously it can be done. But there is similar analysis, that we have conducted in terms of providing with economic estimates of comparing, not having, BT maize in Spain. What would be the economic benefit of that? We have done, we talk about, imports of GM soybean into Spain. We did an analysis on what has been the economic impact, or what would have been the economic impact of not having that GM soybean imported, what the alternatives would be, how much costly they would be. So those kind of analyses are done. Those figures are there. It's just for people making decisions to look at the figures and take decisions based on that.
And we have another, sorry, I don't know if Judith or Paula, do you want to answer this also?
Just to add that there are some studies that shows that, for instance, France, that is one of the major maize producer in Europe, and some studies shows that the productivity per hectare of the increase of the productivity per hectare of the maize system in France reduced. Comparing with the United States, for instance. United States, with traditional, don't have a huge productivity per hectare. They have big areas, but not a huge productivity per hectare, yields per hectare. But some studies shows that there is a split, and now there is a big difference between the increasing of the yield per hectare in EU regarding the increase of yield per hectare in certain countries that adopt this technology.
In our case, as Francisco explained, in Spain it's clear the contribution of money for the agri-food system. I guess it could be something similar in case of genetically modified soybean will be authorized, taking into account that we are very dependent of this type of raw material, not only Spain, but also Europe. And there are a lot of strategies in Europe trying to move forward to reduce the dependence on this raw material. And one of these strategies could be to go through biotechnology and innovation to try to increase the surface dedicated to these crops in Europe or increase its productivity.
Thanks a lot. We have in the chat another question. I think this is for you, Francisco. Agriculture in Spain produces an amount of tons of CO2 per year. By what percentage will it be reduced by growing BT maize? I don't know if you have the concrete data.
Not on the top of my head, but what we have provide. I mean, yeah, I will have to make the calculation. Sorry, I cannot make it right now. But I would direct that person to read the report that is. You can find it on the Antama website. We don't have that exact figure for that, but you can work it out from the figures that we provide there in terms of savings of CO2 tons.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. We can help from the Antama Foundation to bring that information to the person that made the question. So thank you very, very much, Judith, Paula, Graham, and Francisco. It has been a real privilege to count with you all today. Thank you very much. And we move now to our second colloquium, so I am going to give the floor to Jorge.
Thank you, Sol. So, good afternoon again. This second colloquium has a subject, the benefits for value chain of producing GM crops. We have 4 more participants. José Luis Romero from Spain. He's a Spanish farmer and president of the Spanish Maize Producers Association. Gabriela Cruz, who is also a farmer, but in Portugal, and she's president of the Portuguese Association for Conservation Agriculture. Jaime Pissarra, who is executive secretary of IACA, the Portuguese Feed Industry Association, and also plays several roles on European organization, and is also collaborated with the Center for Information of Biotechnology in Portugal. And finally, Bill Wirtz, who is a senior policy analyst at Consumer Choice Center, a consumer advocacy group supporting lifestyle, freedom, innovation, privacy, science, and consumer choice. Thank you very much for being with us to share your ideas about GM crops. So I'm going to start with the producers, maybe with Jose. So you have been producing GM maize for a long time. Could you tell us why do you persist in producing this GM crop, considering the limitations imposed by the European legislation? And I would like also know, what do you feel are the main advantages of these varieties comparing with the more traditional ones?
Well, in Spain, in the Ebro Valley, we have a big problem with the European Corn Board. And we have noticed that we can fight against the European Corn Board very well with GM crops, with the BT corn. And it's important because we have developed a system of cultivation that before it was not able we weren't able to succeed in this system. It consists in having before a crop of barley, and then we rotate to a crop of corn in June. Without tillage, we plant directly the corn in the rest of our plants of barley, and we collect the corn in November or in December. So the whole year our soil is covered by plants, and we use no tillage in June, and we don't have to spray insecticides. That's very interesting in environmental terms.
Okay, thank you. What do you feel about the EU legislation? Do you think that it could improve?
It
Do you
would be
think that
very
it is a strong limitation for you to cultivate maize, but maybe you are interested in new species, and the technology is quite limiting to use new species.
uh, yes, our technology is very old because it's from 1998, I think, and we have been 25, almost 25 years working with these systems, and it works also well. But there are other systems or other varieties of corn with other characteristics that are very interesting, to use less water, to use less nitrogen, and it would help us to 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 attend the what the European Union wants in the new common agricultural policy. I think that is the way to reduce the use of nitrogen. Is the way to reduce the use of um, pesticides, and I don't think it's very hard to find other solutions.
And in terms of income for the farmers, Graham presented some results about an extra income for the farmers by using GM technology. Do you feel that? Is that right? You have extra income from GM crops comparing with the conventional crops?
Yes, yes. For us, it's better because we have two yields. The first yield is 7 tons of barley, and then we have a second yield of 12 tons of corn. We have more production than producing only a crop, and it's better for the field because it's always covered by plants, and it's very interesting for farmers because we have income twice a year, in June and in November, and also we can, if we have problems with water, we can decide to have only the first crop of barley, and then if we don't have enough water, we don't plant corn later. So it's more flexible for farmers to work with this technology.
Okay, thank you, Jose. Now I will move to Gabriela. Hi, Gabriela. Nice to meet you again. So you have been producing GM maize for many years, but now you reduce the culture of these GM varieties. Why did you take this option? Was that because of the European legislation or for any other reason?
Hi, everybody. George, to tell you, there are two main reasons. One of the reasons is the last years we didn't have water available in the amount we needed to grow as much maize as we used to. And the other reason was Paulo was correct. There are some possibility in some areas to do the production areas, but in my case, my neighbor farmers, they are milk producers, and they are afraid, and they have a lot of pressure of the industry, and they don't grow biotech crops. They are in favor of them, but because of the industry and consumers, they are afraid of doing them, doing those crops. So I could not have the benefits of the production area, and the coexistent law in my case was difficult to apply due to the format of the parcels and the irrigation system. There was a little bit of a reason due to the it was not easy to find seeds, GM seeds for the FAO cycles of corn. I could do in my region. So those three reasons were the main ones for the fact that we do not use GM varieties as much as we used to do.
You tell us that your neighbor farmers are afraid of the contamination with GM maize produced by you. Is that real, or is just
it's what I said. I mean,
their imagination?
They are not afraid of the contamination. We cannot use the possibility of being in production zones of production because they don't grow GM crops by the fact that the consumers and the industry, the milk industry, puts a pressure on them in order not to grow GM crops. So I cannot benefit from all the benefits that Paula said that production zones have. Then as I said, in reality, I've talked with the milk producers, and they're not against GM crops. They just have an enormous pressure from the industry and the consumers for not growing GM maize for feeding their milk cows.
But maybe they are feeding the milk with the imported seeds.
Yes, but
so
the consumers don't.
Said.
In the majority of times, the consumers don't know this fact that the milk cows are being fed with GM crops coming from other countries.
And do you feel the need of other GM species for your cultures? We are talking only about maize, but do you think that wheat or barley would be interesting?
Well, yes, because at our farm we grow a lot of cereals, and we introduced some years ago rapeseed, which is a very promising crop. And I think that the rapeseed with the traits already available in the rest of in Canada or in the United States would be very beneficial for us, because rapeseed is very good for our rotations, our cereal rotations, including corn. It's a very good crop to be behind any cereal. And soybeans. Soybeans, because it's a legume, it fixes the nitrogen from the air, and the legumes are now very incentivized in the new CAP reform, or the new Common Agricultural Policy. And the legumes are very good for rotations. And let me just say one thing is, I don't know if you had another question.
No, you can. Yeah.
What I was saying is that I've been practicing for 25 years no-till on the farm, and conservation agriculture is probably one of the most sustainable ways of farming in the world. It has been developed in the in North America and South America and Australia for a lot of many years, and has started in Europe and in Portugal 25 years ago. We would like to have more surface practicing agriculture conservation, but we will get there. And biotechnology is very important for conservation agriculture, because with conservation agriculture, you have 3 aims. One is to no-till the soil or reduce the tillage, to practice rotations and have your soil covered permanently. And so biotechnology would have an enormous synergy with conservation agriculture, which protects soils, enhances soil quality and health, promotes carbon storage, avoids gas emissions. So it has so many benefits that with GM crops would be an enormous and an immense synergy, which would make our farming systems and agriculture in Europe much more sustainable.
Okay, thank you, Gabriela. So now I will ask Jaime. Jaime, we have been through a pandemic for almost 3 years. Now we have the war in Ukraine and the rise of prices in energy and food feed products. How the industry cope with all these problems, and how the import of GM seeds from other countries has contributed to mitigate these problems?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Jorge. Thank you to Antama and SIB to invite me. I'm very proud to be here to celebrate the 25th years of GM in Portugal. I remember very well the first time that we had in Portugal a ship with GM corn in 1998. Then the authorities did not know the legislation or the regulation. Something were new. I was to the office of the Minister and Secretary of State to trying to explain better the situation. And some guys of the Greenpeace enter in the ship, make a lot of noise. They wait for the police, the sea police coming, the Marines, and so on and so on. So a lot of things happened since then. We move forward back sometimes, but we trying to resist and find the better solutions, because the only way that we see that agriculture could move and to be sustainable, it's with the new technologies. Is not the only solution, but it's a very important tool. So for the pandemic situation and in the context of the war, we discussed the food security, the food autonomy, and we remind you that the feed is the main cost of livestock sector. And in Portugal, we are very dependent of the external countries. We import 80% of our needs, and in particular soybean and corn. So we use soybean, corn, and the co-products. We use more or less 60% of the diet, the compound feed. So we are very dependent. With the conflict, we imported more or less 40% of the corn coming from Ukraine, and we had to move to other countries like South America and North America, and the countries which they produce with GM, as you know. So the danger to import some varieties that was not approved in the EU is higher. So we work in that with the national authorities. With Paula, it was not easy, but we had some the derogations with the legislation but they not affect the food security and the feed security. So we have the chance to import. And now it's very important to avoid the potential the disruptions on the functioning on the food and the feed and food supply chain. And we use also very important to the use of the GM raw materials to avoid the risk of mycotoxins also. So we trust on the genetic engineer. It's very important in our opinion. And then we use more and more what we call the precision feeding. So it's very important, like our previous colleagues already said, and the reduction of emissions on the sustainable of our production and the livestock sector. I don't know if Jorge, if you have other questions, but I remind.
I will be back to you, but I have another question, just a quick question. That is, you said that we have changed from importing from Ukraine to South America, maybe Brazil and Argentina.
Yes, Brazil, Argentina. Yes.
Is there any control about the seeds, if they are GM or not GM, or we just import?
No. Each import, each GM event that has been approved in the EU, we have a code, as you know.
So and you know that are GM.
Yeah. So and no problem on that because we label. We label the feed since 2015, I guess. We in that time we cooperate with the authorities to build a guideline on feed and food. So it's for us it's very important that the raw materials is safe. So no matter if it's GM or not GM, because our feed we label our feed.
Okay, so the milk producers know that they are giving GM feed to the animals, and
yes, the milk producers know, the meat producers know also, and if you produce for the organic producer or the organic, they're not allowed to use, and the markets knows that, and we have the authorities to control. And another very important thing, our companies made a self-control also.
Okay, thank you. So now I have a question to Bill. Bill, first, I think it is important if you can give us a general overview about your institution, the Consumer's Choice Center. What do you do in reality? Just a brief statement about your work.
Of course, and I think this is very important because it was said earlier that consumers have somewhat resisted the authorization of GM crops. I would probably like to point out that is some consumers. Organizations represent consumers, but it's impossible to represent every consumer. So I think that's important to underline. The Consumer Choice Center stands for innovation and choice. And I think we build our views on food policy on the 5 pillars, which is safety, affordability, availability, sustainability, and choice. And I think that's very important to mention that when we talk about choice, a lot of people are talking about choice on trying not to buy these products, and that is their prerogative. But it is also the choice of the consumers that want innovative products to be able to purchase those. So I think that should be at the core of the messaging here. And to me, if we want a food system that is sustainable and efficient and produces food that is affordable to consumers, especially right now when we have such staggering food price inflation, we should look at a model that allows for new technologies.
Okay, thank you. So now a question more related with the subject. Is the are the GM crops at the center of your concerns, or is just a lateral question, not so important?
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting because we're celebrating the 25 years of BT Maize, and I'm only 28 years old. That is not to make all of you feel very old, but that is just to sort of underline that time has passed. And while our trade partners, specifically Brazil, Canada, and the United States, have really moved on, we've kind of been stuck. If you compare, for instance, in the United States, agricultural efficiency is almost at 150% higher compared to 60 years ago. And in Europe, it's mostly stagnant. And that has one of the reasons for that is that Europe has based itself on a hazard-based risk assessment approach, while the US takes a risk-based risk assessment approach. I think it's very important to note there's also cultural reasons for that, but the unfortunate reality is also that there are organizations out there, and because, I mean, Greenpeace was mentioned earlier, I have this on my phone cover.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you can see, it says Greenpeace versus Science. So this is something that I think is very important. And I would also like to point out, if we talk about BT Maize, I wrote down 6 of the most popular concerns that some groups used to have about BT Maize before its introduction. And whether they've been actually true, I'll tell you. So on the 6 claims, BT corn would be responsible for the destruction of the monarch butterfly. Debunked, not true. BT corn you would poison yourself by ingesting it. Not true. The escaped trans genes of BT corn mixing with the non-BT population in cross-pollination. Not true. BT maize will create frankenfoods. Not true. BT corn will make the person more susceptible to allergies. Also not true. BT corn generally leads to a decrease in biodiversity. Also incorrect. So while organizations have a right to their points of views, they don't have the right to their own facts. And I think it's very important that when we talk about choice and availability of food, that we stay with the facts. And yes, there are organizations out there that oppose any GM crops. That is their prerogative. They can go out and do that. But to me, I don't feel represented by that, which is why we started the Consumer Choice Center. And we believe that consumers have the choice to choose, have the right to choose those products. So yes, it's very much an important issue for us.
I saw a survey some time ago. I can't remember the company that make it, but there is a better perception of GM crops in the general public. Do you have also that perception or no? In Europe, of course.
So we did polling on this issue. What we found is that 1 in 3 consumers believe that the existing GM crop regulation in the European Union is too restrictive, and 67% of consumers believe that technology that allows food prices to go down should be allowed on the European market. The negative perception is, of course, because my background is in broadcast journalism. I know that some of my former colleagues don't do their jobs particularly well. When I see a news article with a thumbnail that has an apple with a syringe in it, I always cringe. But that is unfortunately the reality of some of the media reporting that is done on this, and it's unfortunate. And on the other side, I think it's very important. I think this event has really shown how we need to communicate about these things. Recently, on one of our podcasts, I was talking to Dr. Angela Baird at ETH Zurich. She's responsible in the Department of Consumer Behavior and Consumer Perception. And what she says is that it actually has very little to do whether the consumers are educated or not. Actually, when you look at the research, whether consumers are educated or not changes virtually nothing about how they feel about crop protection or about GM crops. And she writes in one of her most recent papers, and I just want to quote, "Our findings suggest that future communication about gene technology should focus more on discussing trade-offs between using an agricultural technologies and tangible and relevant benefits instead of a unidimensional focus on risk and safety." So it's about how we talk about these issues. And I think this is very important for regulators and people in government. it's important to give consumers a palpable idea of what it means to use those technologies in order to convince them. Last week I was in Washington, D.C. at the USDA Agricultural Outlook Forum, and there was a company that had presented CRISPR gene-edited vegetables, and what they said is when they distributed some of those products in San Francisco at farmers markets, is that the children were eating those vegetables like it was candy, and the parents that said that they were usually a bit more concerned about GM crops suddenly said, oh, well, my kids are eating the required amount of vegetables. This is something palpable for consumers to actually see.
And
so we
still
need
alive.
good examples. And yeah, exactly. And we shouldn't talk down to consumers. We can't pretend like they're just uneducated. They just don't know. That is not a good way to go about it. We need to take people on board.
Okay, thank you. Now I'll go back to Jose and Gabriela. As you know, Jose, you are not an organic farmer, I suppose, but GM crops, do you think that GM crops would be useful for organic farming? Organic farming does not allow this kind of crops, but this is a provocative question, but I don't know why, because all the other crops are genetically modified. So what is your feeling about this?
I think it would be very interesting to use GM crops to organic farm, because they don't need insecticides, or they don't need to protect the soil against some worms, and they are perfect for growing a plant without using other chemicals, I think. So I think this idea is perfect for organic farm.
If you were an organic farmer, you would like to use the GM crops, although
yes,
they are not
of course.
allowed.
Of
Okay,
course,
thank you.
I grow also not only corn. I have also grapes, and there are some traits that can fight against some fungi in the grapes, and it would be fantastic to have this kind of grapes and don't use pesticides to fight against fungi.
Okay, I agree with you. Thank you. Gabriela, what do you think about this? The same question.
Well, we have to be very, very transparent about organic farming. People think that organic products don't have any chemical products. In fact, that is not true. Organic products have chemical products like copper and sulfur, for example, and so we have to demystify that organic products don't have any chemical products. They have some chemical products. There's another problem with organic farming, which there isn't with conservation agriculture. In organic farming, as they cannot use herbicides, they tend to till the soil very intensively. And when you till the soil, one thing that you don't do in conservation agriculture, when you till the soil as intensively as they do in organic farming, you don't protect the soil, you destroy the soil, you harm the soil. So you have to be very, the advantages and disadvantages of each technology, and not say that one technology is the best and is the one who is saving the planet. So organic farming is not saving the planet at all, and I would recommend conservation agriculture other than organic farming.
Okay, thank you, Gabriela.
Have I answered?
Jaime,
Okay.
I have a
Yes,
last
Jorge.
question for you.
Okay.
Francisco and Graham told us about the objectives of the European Union, the Farm to Fork strategy, and the Green Deal, and a great part of this strategy is based on reducing the application of pesticides and herbicides. Um, I think this is another problem for your your industry
Yeah.
because we need to keep to produce the plants, but the farmers are not allowed to use this kind of products. So, what is the alternative if they can't use also the GM crops? How are you going to cope with
George,
this subject?
yes, we are very worried about the impact. We ask to the Commission to make a global impact assessment on that. The Commission refused to do it. The only impact assessment that we have is a separated impact assessment. Let's say with 25% on organic food, the reduction of the gas emissions, and so on. So we need a global impact assessment. And the only impact assessment global that we know, it's coming from USDA in the beginning. You can learn, you can read it, and we have some impact assessment made by some organizations. And all the impact assessments show us that if we apply this kind of measures, because I didn't say that, I don't say that the measures are wrong, but we should take into account the conflict in Ukraine, the times that we live, and so it's a question of speeding, and we need to public policies to mitigate this kind of impact. But the impact show us, like in 2015, I don't know if you remember, when the Commission proposed that we called in that time the opt-out solution, the impact is more or less the same. It's increased the cost of feed, the cost of food, lack of raw materials in Europe, so the Europe become more and more dependent for the third countries. So we launch again that we need the impact assessment, and we have to define the role of the EU on the global markets. And if you live in the global world, and we believe that in the future it will be in the globalization, despite the war and some tentatives to become more and more restriction in each country. So we need an harmonization of the rules, the approval rules of the global world. So in particular, we believe on the freedom of choice, and we hope that we have the reliable information based on science and not in the fear or noise. So we want that the member states look at more attention on the CAP and in the farm to fork strategy more carefully with the policies, current policies, to avoid the lack of food and feed in Europe.
Okay, thank you, Jaime. So, Bill, a last question for you. GM crops have proved to be safe. So we are now commemorating 25 years of maize culture, and there are other GM crops in soybean, for example. So they've proved to be environmental and healthy, safe. However, the politics, especially in European Union, are still very afraid of this technology. Why do you think this happened? is because of pressure of the public, or there are some some mysteries about
I mean,
the mind of politics?
There's many. I mean, politics is a complicated web of different things that play into it, and I think you could almost say that they apply the precautionary principle to their political statements. I mean, they have to be very careful. They think that any decision that might be made might be thrown back at them. I've been in a situation where things that I have said positively on GM crops have gotten me threats that I received. So people do feel very passionate about this, but I think it's important to stay strong on the arguments and the scientific reality. I also want to, because it's the last question, and it almost seems like I'm getting the last word. I want to just say that we need to absolutely celebrate farmers. What is extraordinary in our food system is that the research now points to the fact that we have reached, in the early 2000s, peak agricultural land use. That is incredible. People really do need to appreciate this. We make more food with less resources. And I think that is the approach we need to take going into the future, because we're not just trying to feed 8 billion people now, we're trying to feed 11 billion people in the not so far future. And I think that's what we really need to think about. How do we make food affordable and available to everyone? I think the European Union is obviously lagging behind right now, but I think that we will soon see a revamp. During that revamp of the 2001 directive, I think a lot of people are going to throw everything at the wall. It's a bit like the examples of the claims that were made about BT maize before it was authorized. We're going to have a similar situation. People are going to make up lies. Maybe they're going to find a new synonym for frankenfoods. But that is okay with us because we know what the scientific reality is. But we need to be more vocal, because we don't want to end up in a situation where we stagnate even more in our European production. So why do politicians end up doing this? A slight of fear, and because sometimes they don't hear the voices of people who support it, which is why we have to be louder.
The voice of science. Okay, thank you, Bill. I think it's time to finish. I would like to thank Jose, Jaime, Gabriela, Bill. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to thank also the representatives of the other colloquium and all the participants and the audience. And thank you very much. I will give now the word to Solid to finish this webinar.
Thank you very much, George. Well, we have reached the end of this webinar, as you said. Thank you all for your participation, to the people attending, and of course, to our experts this afternoon, Clara Aguilera, Álvaro Amaro, Francisco Areal, Graham Brooks, Judith Martin, Paula Garcia, Gabriela Cruz, José Luis Romeo, Jaime Pizarra, and Bill Wirth. Thank you all for your interventions here, for joining us in this webinar, and especially thanks a lot for sharing with us your time and also your knowledge. And with our gratitude to our experts, we finish this webinar hoping that it has been interesting for all of you. Muchas gracias a todos. Muito obrigado a todos. Thank you for joining us, and best regards.